Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Yeah, so in terms of this sort of rip and replace we're talking about, someone comes in completely, turns the software and the tools and the strategy on the place. I mean, I guess what we should think about as well is what is the impact of that, within an organization? What does it set them back a certain amount of time? I'd imagine it does. Does it cause disruption in the manufacturing processes? I'm just wondering, because obviously I guess with those kind of decisions, they're thinking about the long-term benefits of it, but there must be some short-term pain from doing that, right? From having that approach to such a shift in strategy.
I mean, it's learning a different tool and it's going through implementation in some iteration all over again, right? Some are going to be lengthier depending on the step you're taking or the upgrade you're making. And some might be shorter if you're going from a cumbersome system to hopefully an easier to use solution that still meets your minimum needs. I mean, I see it often in the CMMS world, right? We have a lot of legacy solutions out there now. So sometimes these people are doing rip and replace that makes sense, or doing these migrations to newer capable systems, right? Either based on a need or just a cost need, or these systems are being sunsetted. So sometimes people are doing this for all the right reasons, and I don't want to shame that. But when you have a very capable system in place and people are using it and you're getting value from it, and then just based on one person's preference, they cancel that contract and then sign a new agreement, and then have to pay additional fees to migrate all the data that they had of value in their old system to import into the new system, or clean it up and do consulting. Again, depending on the depth of the tool, you may have to do custom configuration on the back end. You may have to rebuild integration points with other systems if that's in place. So again, at times it can set you back significantly. And again, that could, if you do it too soon as a new leader in an organization, if it's not for the right reasons, it's just on preference, you're going to get burned for it quickly. So hopefully you're doing it thoughtfully. But again, I like to come in, even at new organizations, just sit back and observe things for a little while. And if you think there's a need for it, cool, there's a time and a place for it. Too often we hear about just someone who came in, they didn't like the way the system looked or how it functioned for this particular, they were just finding things, right? And then they decide to rip and replace. And unfortunately, sometimes it does set an organization back. Sometimes it's the best things for organizations, again, depending on their need and what they were using versus what they're moving to.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I guess the best way, I mean, I can only speak from a Senseye Predictive Maintenance standpoint, but the best, I mean, it might not always stop, resolve it or stop that happening, but I guess it's building up a bank of success cases. I mean, in our case, cases that have been resolved from the product, which might have saved, certain hours in downtime, which obviously comes to a monetary value and things. And it's building like a log of this, which I guess from our point of view, we use to support our, those internal champions you mentioned, to be able to go to whoever they need to speak to in the business, whether to justify it or scale it potentially to other areas of the business. So that must play, at least help with your case by saying, look, it's saved us all this money and all this, in whatever. But I guess even then, that still might not make any difference. If someone's made a decision, they've made a decision, right? So, but that can only help with it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it depends. Again, it all depends on what you're going from to what you're going to and the reasons why you're doing so. And again, does the organization have any policy governing this? And can you relate that to the bottom line of a positive change?
Yeah, no, exactly. I just wanted to, because we mentioned, and actually the original basis of this conversation was obviously this white paper that Brightly brought out. And I wanted to bring it back to go on a different sort of tangent, I guess, and talk about some of the themes in that. So one of the terms used was physical labour-based maintenance. And first of all, maybe others know what that means. They probably do. I'm not an expert in the industry. So maybe Corey could start by sort of explaining what that means and why is that how does that relate to that general topic of the overarching topic we're talking about today. So preparing the next generation for success.
I think the physical labor-based workforce generally just alludes to blue-collar workers, right? The trades, the skills. I think it's just another way of saying it. Maybe encompasses a few more groups in that versus traditional blue-collar. But it's applicable because, again, we're talking about, especially this white paper was focused on the industries that we support with Brightly, which are maintenance organizations. Maintenance or reliability or an asset management function of a business and operations. So they rely every day on people to go out and turn wrenches and keep the air handler working or keep the production line up so they can make a product and make a profit and keep the business afloat.
And in terms of the challenges organizations are facing with this approach, what would you say are the main sort of challenges?
Kind of what we talked about earlier with the tribal knowledge is, again, they're having a hard time finding the right people to backfill these positions or do succession planning because there's this very dwindling pipeline of talent left. Again, of people going to trade schools or people with this kind of ethic or looking for this type of work coming out. Now I think I posted on it on LinkedIn about addressing the skills gap, right? And it's kind of a 4-prong approach, both looking at short-term and long-term. And then in each of those, looking at hiring. So outside looking influences or retention. So again, starting with the short-term and internal retention is how do you treat your people? And do you have any mechanism of training and development to upskill? We talked about it earlier with this reactive culture. We get so focused on the here and now that frontline operators typically is somewhat of a mindless task nowadays, right? They're told to think less and do more, right? Just keep the machine running, do what you got to do to fix it, keep it up and running so we can make product, right? So it's becoming this less and less of a thoughtless task versus they used to be able to be empowered to solve their own problems at the line without calling out maintenance, right? And when it was actually broken, you needed overhaul or repair, that's when you call maintenance. Now, maintenance is getting called out for any little micro stop or production loss, and that shouldn't be the case, right? So how can we understand the lowest barrier of entry into essentially managing our critical skills gap, which is traditionally in our realm in manufacturing, right? We're losing those high skill workers in maintenance. Well, we try and reduce the dependency on maintenance for every little task. So we upskill our operators to be able to solve their own problems, do their own daily, weekly, monthly PMs, and then call maintenance when it's a big breakout, right? So we create this dual ownership of the assets. That way it reduces the reliance of organizations on maintenance to solve every little problem they have, right? Instead of this firefighting organization, we let maintenance start focusing on proactive work to try and mitigate some of these little stops that these operators are encountering by empowering the operators to take care of these little things day in and day out. But that takes training and it takes committed leadership. It takes transformative leadership, right? Because that's different than what we do today in manufacturing. So I think upskilling your operators at the front line to solve some of their own challenges and do some of this light work or this routine work that maintenance is charged with doing today will lighten the burden on maintenance. And then you need to also look at tapping into the military talent pool. I know in the U.S. alone, 200,000 service members leave the U.S. military service every single year. That's a huge talent pool that maintenance is a big part of every branch of military, right? Whether you're on ships or aircraft or tanks, armored vehicles, you do some kind of maintenance. There's generally specialists for that, right? But how do we figure out how to communicate and get into that talent pool to pull those people in? Even if it's short term, that's succession planning. That's identifying people with the skills we need, speaking their language, and having access to pull them into our organization.
And just to pick up on one of the points you made there, is there generally like an over-reliance on maintenance, like you said, to do tasks big and small? Is that something that's quite common in sort of manufacturing from your own experience?
In reactive cultures,
Yeah.
Kind of what we were talking about earlier. Are you a reactive organization from a general business perspective, or are you proactive? And the ones that are reactive are relying on maintenance, and these interdepartmental conflicts start coming up, right? I'm an operator. I just operate the machine. When it goes down, that's not my problem. I call maintenance, right? So we kind of cast everything off on maintenance. That's typically a problem that plagues small and mid-sized manufacturers, again, just because over time, these leadership changes or the lack of adoption of these technologies, they become over reliant on these skilled laborers that they have, and they fixate on today and how do I get this product out the door. So they start prodding the operators, think less, do more. Right? Think about what you're doing less and just do more actions, right? Whether it's value add or not. And when something breaks, call maintenance. So how do we change that? And that's a mindset shift. That's an organizational culture shift. We have to become more proactive. And there's many, many, many studies done on how that works, different maturities of organizations, different sizes. I think the biggest bang for your buck you're going to get is what's called operator care, which is training up your operators on how to care for the equipment and take some ownership of that. Empower them to feel like they can solve their own problems. And again, it may slow down the production rate, but it's going to increase the quality because they're thinking more, and now they're acting as skilled laborers as well.
And because we're talking about this, I know sort of going back to the knowledge gap things, but is there like a knowledge gap or between the person who operates the machine and maintenance? Should that relationship be more joined up? Can it be more joined up? And I'm talking as someone who's a little bit of an outsider on this. So or is that just the way it works? I don't know in manufacturing.
It shouldn't, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion. It should be less department versus department conflict and should be more one team, one fight, right? So, but that requires leadership to govern that, maybe build a policy talking about how we do what we do and why we do it, and establishing that, again, we're a team, we're working together, and we build roles and responsibilities. Again, far too often, production just keeps getting output shoved down their throat, where they have to draw back on their attention and effort to the input, which is how they care for the equipment, or when we take it offline for proactive and preventative maintenance, right? We never have time in reactive organizations. We never are given time to take equipment offline to do preventive maintenance or inspections to catch little things. But all of a sudden, we have all the time in the world once the equipment's down and broke. So how do we reverse that? So there is a knowledge gap, and there's a knowledge gap in reactive organizations between the operators and maintenance, because there's this very hard line drawn as far as this is your responsibility and this is theirs, right? And to operators in reactive cultures, just turning the equipment on and making sure it's producing product is my only responsibility. Everything outside of that is not mine. And that's where you hear it's not my job a lot, right? That permeates in reactive organizations. Proactive organizations, they start blurring those lines and they create more of a one team, one fight, right? And especially in organizations that do this really well, they have that lean manufacturing and that TPM, right? They've adopted all 8 pillars of TPM, one of which is autonomous maintenance, which is also called operator care. So it's, again, creating this ownership of the equipment itself and then abiding by our designed preventive maintenance schedules, because we know that has a direct impact on performance of our assets.
And TPM, sorry, just for
total productive maintenance.
Okay.
It's I believe it's Toyota or Japanese methodology from the 60s. And I think it got a lot of its principles from the American military industrial complex out of World War II. Similar to a lot of lean or Six Sigma methodologies, right? They were all kind of discovered when the U.S. became this military industrial complex, right? When Ford Motor Company is now building receivers of 50 caliber machine guns. I still had those in the Navy in 2016. Still had some of the weapon systems that said Ford Motor Company, right? And you knew those were from World War II.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really interesting. How it links back to that, you just never think, would you? But in terms of, just thinking in terms of those two again? Is it a case of, I know you said this is my job, this is my lane, as you'd say, this is my lane, this is my lane, this is what we do. Is it also a case when you say reactive as well? Because some organizations are reactive, it's like you don't have time. It's almost a time thing as well. So it's like, I don't have time to think about anything else because, I need to be on, especially when you said fighting fires, which is, common maintenance, for a big breakdown, that has to be the focus, right? So is that part of the problem? It's like there's almost not enough time to think about how they can collaborate. So too busy focusing on reacting some of these, these issues and breakdowns and everything else.
I think there's a knowledge gap here as well as what is maintenance. And I'm going to quote a gentleman here, and it's not going to be a direct quote. It's going to be a paraphrase. Joe Anderson from Reliability X. He was on another buddy of mine's podcast, CMMS Radio, and he was talking about similar topics like this, right? And he was saying maintenance isn't firefighting. Maintenance isn't repairs, right? We used to call those departments M&R, maintenance and repair, because they're two distinct functions. Repair is it's broke, I'm going to go fix it. Maintenance is to maintain the equipment in its needed state by the business. So to call maintenance or call firefighting activities maintenance is kind of a disservice, right? And it comes back to this knowledge gap, if you will, of what are the appropriate methodologies and approaches to maintenance? How do we actually manage it as a business? And how do we employ it to achieve the results we're trying to? And it's happened over time. We've devolved to this state. But it's going to take something significant to kickstart our way back out of it. And it may just start with awareness and education of, hey, we haven't always done it this way. Maybe we need to get back out of this. And a lot of people are seeing that. And the more ROI statistics are pushed out, more white papers like this, people will start to connect the dots that, look, there's a knowledge gap that happened over the past 20 years of how we devolved into this reactive state. There is such a thing as proactive. And we don't have to do it this way. There's a better way we could do it. That's why there are established maintenance and reliability best practices. And best practices are just methodologies and approaches that achieve superior results versus other methods of doing so. That's why preventative maintenance is such a stakeholder, is it a superior approach to managing your critical assets than run to failure is. And you would think that would be common knowledge, but unfortunately, as we know, it still isn't.
No, absolutely. And I guess the other divide, if you want to call it a divide that we haven't covered yet, is the generational divide as well, which we want to be careful around, I guess, to some degree. But how can we close this first of all? I mean, how big is the issue, I guess, first of all, and then how do we go about closing, this divide that we've sort of touched upon a little bit, I think, today?
I think the skills gap the forecasting of how big the skills gap was minimized for a long time because people were too focused on this generational divide and the different generations that are in the workforce. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but I saw it firsthand, right? You have two older generations in place that knew life before devices and technology. And then we now have Gen Z and the next generation coming up that are digital natives. They've only ever known having a phone or a computer in their possession that they could just have access to all of human knowledge and Google whatever question they have randomly, right? I think of Alexa. Almost everyone has an Alexa in their house. And what do? Alexa, and you just ask it a random question and it gives you the answer, right? Just searches the internet. It's kind of the now ChatGPT, right? A native language response. So when my 2-year-old daughter asked me some random question, me and my wife look at each other and we're like, I don't know. And that's a great question. We just ask Alexa. Well, that's the new generation that's coming into manufacturing. But you're trying to hire that generation that's only ever known technology and their ability for them to solve their own challenges. You're now trying to fit them into an organization that is still doing pen and paper, that there's no set processes, and they're not empowered to solve their own problems. They're told that's not your job. You call someone else. That's why they don't stick around. That's why Tesla does so well. And I don't think Tesla has a hiring or a skills gap problem because they attract those people and they allow them to solve their own problems utilizing technology every single day. I think there's a lot of very smart people that have talked about this that I'm just piggybacking on here, watching some of their content over the years of, again, digital transformation, right? And what the value of digital transformation and how some people are getting it and some aren't. And those that aren't are in a situation where they might not ever be able to recover because, number one, they won't be able to fill these positions and they're going to fall farther and further behind in contracts and revenue and in their ability to staff and produce products. Eventually, they might die. So the legacy generation, they're here. They're still here today. Some of them are still coming back from retirement because they left without these processes in place, right? And there was this gap knowledge. So they're coming back to try and refit it. And I just talked to a gentleman yesterday. He was retired for 1.5 years, I believe, and then just came back. Again, because while he was gone, some things fell through the cracks because they didn't have a single source of truth to document this information, like a knowledge base. So we talked about how to utilize a CMMS, build different reoccurring job plans or preventive maintenance schedules, and one of which could be used for nothing to do with preventive maintenance, but is more contractor management. So again, to make sure your contracts with certain contractors don't fall through the cracks. And those are like little things, the low-hanging fruit that people don't think of, but it'll put you in a pinch real quick.
And just on your point about a new generation joining, sort of maybe, expecting, let's say, technology to support or help, with their day-to-day challenges. I wonder if they often, maybe it's a hard question to answer definitively, but in a lot of organizations, I guess they come in and go, oh, we should be doing this and we should be doing that. Is there often a lot of resistance, I guess, to change? I guess that's ultimately, isn't it, to change to pen and paper and to technology. But I guess they must be the ones coming in trying to drive change and maybe sometimes feeling they're not getting too far. And then that again drives them to look elsewhere for companies that are sort of more aligned with their, how they work, how people work now.
Come on now. You work for a technology company. You know as well as I do, especially in marketing. That's your job, is the counter messaging to that rhetoric in the industry. So there is a resistance to change. Now, again, kind of back with the reactive culture, you have to understand the mentalities. And they've been told, the older generation forever has been around through robotics. And they were told robots were going to replace human workers, right? So they were fighting for the security of their job. Now with AI, well, AI is going to replace you. No, right? Just like robots didn't replace you. It just allowed you to be more skilled because now we need a human to monitor and maintain that robot or to program it or to build. You have to have a facility that builds robots, right? I mean, they can kind of help build themselves to a certain detail. But there's this rhetoric around in the legacy generation, and now they see these newer generations coming in that are asking for change, are pushing for change. And my last job, my president of the organization, when we were talking about this idea, he made the comment he really liked the fact that my generation was coming in and trying to document these things. We were trying to digitize what we're doing and digitalize our processes. He liked that. But there is this still friction, almost like department versus department in manufacturing, operations versus maintenance, or operations versus whoever. There's this friction between the generations where the older generation, they aren't positioned in a way to see themselves as the mentors for the future generations, or at least the ones that don't get it. They need to mentor the ones. They need to pass down this information while they can. The older generation doesn't have to be the one to learn how to use a computer to document what they know. They can pass this on to the technicians or the newer workforce. And the newer workforce, because they're digital natives, they can easily digitize these processes, right? So it doesn't have to be this reliance on the older generation to do it unless you don't have this kind of mechanism in place to do it. But think of it like analog to digital. That's the best way I can describe the current generations in the workforce is you have the ones that are ones and zeros, pen and paper, and then you have the ones that, like with Mendex, right? They're starting to become their own citizen developers, and they may write their own application at night on their free time, right? Or they're gamers or they're streamers, right? They know how to utilize technology to their benefit. So how do we utilize their strengths and how do we utilize the strength of older generations? And it comes back to leadership. You have to position it in a way the older generation sees themselves as mentors for the next generation. It's not that the new generation is coming in trying to undo everything you've ever done, and they're telling you that you've been stupid for the way you've done it for the past 40 years. Like you have to manage that relationship, just like we have to manage roles and responsibilities in manufacturing between operations and maintenance or any department of the business.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.